One day, 70s action hero Chuck Norris decided to go skydiving. And as the plane opened up and he jumped out, he found out that the parachute did not open. And so the next day, he returned it for his refund. We laugh about stuff like that, but all throughout the 20th century and probably for most of history, the idea of a manly man has been the objective of what we want to become. Guys like John Wayne and Charles Bronson, Clint Eastwood and Sylvester Stallone. Today's version of that would be Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, a former wrestler and actor who's built like a brick wall. And even in cartoons, we have such characters as Popeye. Eats his spinach and then suddenly grows big muscles. The idea of a manly man was the epitome of what every boy's desire was. And yet today, we're struggling with this. There is a war on that idea. Now, I grew up in the 70s, and I remember my father taking me to see all these karate movies with Chuck Norris, and probably what led me to begin taking martial arts when I was in my teens. And this is because this is how God has designed boys. When you see how children play, boys will gravitate to things like cars and action figures, and girls will gravitate to things like dolls and dresses. And I understand that there are tomboys out there, and some girls will be more inclined to climb trees and wear jeans, and they fight with their mothers about wearing dresses and things like that. But by and large, girls want to play with girly things, and boys want to play with things that are more macho. That's just kind of the way society, unless we are socially engineering and forcing the issue, you put a bunch of toys in a room, let a bunch of kids loose and see what happens. Okay? Now, why is this? What is it that creates this difference? Well, in men, in boys, there is a specific hormone called testosterone. And it is required for the healthy development of male sex organs, growing of facial and body hair, lowering of the voice, increase in height, increase in muscle mass, growth of the Adam's apple. The importance of testosterone is not just limited to puberty, however. Throughout adulthood, the hormone is integral in a variety of functions, such as maintaining libido, sperm production, maintaining muscle strength and mass, promoting healthy bone density. Estrogen, on the other hand, which is the primary hormone in female development, is to develop a woman's reproductive organs. So you have two different hormones. Now, men and women both have both hormones. Women do have testosterone. Men do have estrogen. However, depending on what chromosome you have, whether it's two X's or an XY, men have the Y chromosome, more testosterone will be developed because that is what God uses to create us to be men. But today, there is a war on masculinity. Masculinity is vilified itself. And so you have terms that are out there now called male privilege. And then, of course, we have the racial component of that, and now it's male white privilege, as if somehow that me being born a white male has given me an unfair advantage over everybody else, including women, including blacks, including all kinds of whatever. There is a war on the eating of meat, and that we need to go vegetarian and whatnot and vegan, and that they're actually considering taxing meat in some countries. Why? Well, because protein is important to building strong muscles. And so if we can reduce that, we won't have manly men. And instead of protein, what we want we want our protein to come from alternative sources like soy. And the biggest problem with soy is that it mimics the production of estrogen in the body. Too much soy will produce too much estrogen. And so for women, this actually has been known to cause cancer. And in men, of course, it lowers the amount of testosterone. Birth control pills. That was a revolution. It did two things. Number one, it encouraged the reduction of repopulation by transforming sex from a procreative function, which was what God primarily made it for. Now, did God make sex enjoyable? Of course he did. We wouldn't do it otherwise, and the human race probably would have been wiped out within a couple of generations. However, the primary purpose of sex is for reproduction. The fact that we get to enjoy it is a bonus. And so with the development of birth control pills and things like that, is that you've now transformed sex from being a procreative function to a pleasurable one. But the other thing that birth control pills do is that it pumps estrogen into the water system, because if a woman takes it and then when she goes to the bathroom, that all goes into the water system. And then as we cleanse the water through filtration, we end up drinking it. But if you put chlorine in the water and stuff like that, it doesn't take the hormones out. Same thing with people dumping all of their medications into the water. And so it is playing with people's physical, it's messing with the physiology of an entire generation. Fluoride. Oh, and not only does estrogen in the drinking water mess with women, but it also reduces the amount of testosterone in men, of course. Fluoride. We're told that we need fluoride in our drinking water in order to maintain strong bones. Actually, the opposite is true. Fluoride not only weakens bones, and they've got studies that will prove this. Fluoride weakens bones, it damages kidneys, it lowers cognitive function and IQ, but it also produces female puberty earlier and lowers reproductive hormones in women and testosterone and fertility in men. And that's why we have this toxic hormone that is put into all of our drinking water. There's a lot of things that are warring against masculinity out there. Why is there such a war on masculinity? What is the biggest problem with having strong men? Because healthy, strong men who love God are the most terrifying thing to the devil. When men are men, they act decisively, they act bravely, honorably, sacrificially, with less concern for themselves than for others. They act as providers, protectors, and lead their families into godly worship. 90% of the problems today, in my estimation, this is just what I suspect, 90% of the problems today are because men do not take their rightful place in society. Everything else that's going wrong with society today, in some cultures, for instance, in the African-American community down in the United States, it is estimated that 80% of children are born out of wedlock. That is a catastrophic statistic, because now all of these children, especially the boys, are growing up without a male role model. And if someone doesn't model how a godly man is supposed to act, they're going to take all of that libido, that testosterone, unless, of course, it's dumbed down, and they're going to do bad things with it. Statistically, some studies have shown that if a father does not go to worship service, to church, then 33%, only 33%, 1/3 of children will attend church. And then as adults, only 5% will become regular churchgoers. If just the father goes to congregation without the mother, between 2/3 and 3/4 of children will attend church. And if both parents do, up to 90% on average will attend. One survey also found that if a child is the first person in the household to become a Christian, there is only a 3.5% probability everyone else in the house will follow. If the mother is the first to become a Christian, there is a 17% probability everyone else in the household will follow. However, if the father is the first one in the family to become a Christian, there is a 93% probability everyone else in the house will follow. As the father goes, so does the household. And as men go, so goes society. Let me repeat that. In the household, as a father goes, so goes the rest of the household. And in society, as the men go, so go the rest of society. The devil is afraid of a manly man. The devil is terrified of what a bunch of men who take their rightful position in society will do when they lock and load, there's a manly term again, and follow God and go out to conquer, because that is what men are designed to do. They are hunters, they are gatherers, they are providers, they are protectors. And when men go out and follow God into battle, who can stop them? So why do we have this war against, what has led to this war against masculinity today? 70 years ago, 75 years ago, in World War, how much different would society be today in North America if there was a mandatory army service again? Some countries still have it. Israel does. And Israel is one of the fiercest nations in the world when it comes to battle. Most of Israel's enemies fear what she can do, not only because of her technology, but because of how the soldiers are disciplined and know how to fight. When I first went to Israel, our tour guide spoke to us, and we talked about the 6-Day War in 1967. And he said the Syrians fighting again, and that was when Israel took the Golan Heights at the north end of Israel. He said that in 1967, Israel was like a university graduate fighting against someone in public school. That was the difference between the Israelis and the Arabs. Well, when they got to the 1973, the Yom Kippur War, the Syrians had graduated to at least high school, but there was still a huge difference. And that's because the Israelites are trained for war. And as we spoke about a few weeks back in our series in the Psalms, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. As believers in the Lord Yeshua the Messiah, and as followers of Yahweh Elohim, we are to be warriors for the kingdom. We are to be disciplined. We are to be... The word meek, we've talked about this in the past. When it says the meek shall inherit the earth, everybody in society today associates meek with weak. But that is not what weak means, what meek means, rather. The Greek word for meek, when translated, actually means power under control, because the Greeks used to call their war horses meek. Now, I was a big old stallion, and it was snorting, and it was chomping at the bit, and it was ready to go into battle. But it wouldn't go until the rider gave him a kick, and away they went. We need to be powerful, but under control. It says that Moses was the meekest of all men. Was Moses weak? He led a nation of 3 million people through the desert for 40 years, won battles with them, organized things. That was no weak man. That was no mousy man. That was a man's man. Yeshua, it says, I am meek and humble of heart in Matthew 11 and verse 28. Come to me all who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For I am meek and humble of heart. Was Yeshua a wimp? I'm not talking about the Roman depiction of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy. Yeshua was a manly man. I mean, he walked all over the place. It says, in the gospel accounts, it says that, well, he went from Jerusalem to Capernaum or to Galilee. You know what kind of walk that? And they walk the whole way. People today can't walk like that. You walk for a couple of kilometers and you're like, hey, I got a cramp. He was a manly man, but he was power. I mean, he had the power of God himself under control. If we look back and find out what we're fighting, and this whole series is about the Jezebel spirit, but in order to really understand the Jezebel spirit and how it operates, we have to understand the spirit of Ahab. Ahab was Israel's king, the northern kingdom of Israel. And it says in 1 Kings in chapter 25 that Ahab was a special king. Now, all of the kings of Israel did wickedly. There wasn't one from the time that God separated the northern kingdom from the south, and Jeroboam took over, and Jeroboam he created the two calves, which caused Israel to sin, and that's what it says over and over again. So every single king, and there was probably, I think there was about 20 of them, if I'm not mistaken.
Did you say
First Kings.
Well, there's no 25 chapters on First Kings.
No, 1 Kings 16.
Oh, 16.
16:25. Did I say 1 Kings 25?
I think so.
Yeah. Don't go to 1 Kings 25. You've got a bad Bible if you can find that. 1 Kings 16:25 says, Omri did evil in the eyes of the Lord and did worse than all who were before him. For he walked in the ways of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, and in a sin by which he made Israel sin, provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their idols. And then it says, now the rest of the acts of Omri, which he did, and the might that he showed, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? So Omri rested with his fathers and was buried in Samaria. Then Ahab, or Ahab his son, reigned in his place. In the 38th year of Asa, king of Judah, Ahab the son of Omri became king over Israel, and Ahab the son of Omri reigned over Israel and Samaria 22 years. Now again, Ahab the son of Omri did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. And it came to pass, as though it had been a trivial thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that he took as wife Isbel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of Sidonians, and he went and served Baal and worshiped him. So here we have a genesis of what happened. How did we end up with this king that led Israel into the steep slope of apostasy? Well, number one, the problem started with his father. Who is Omri? Omri was a general, and after Zimri killed the king who preceded him, he took the throne, but the people of Israel rejected Zimri, and instead they chose Omri to reign in his place. And so Omri fought against Zimri, and it says Zimri ended up committing suicide, burned the house down around him. Well, he ruled for 22 years, 28 years. And he was a warrior king. And he did evil. And so because he chose evil, he led his entire household into greater apostasy than even those who before him. And so what he did is he set the stage. He set the stage for the decline, the further decline of Israel. And so what happens is that Solomon, ruling over the United Kingdom, starts marrying foreign women. And he starts building all of these idols and altars to all these foreign gods. God warned not to do that. God, in judgment on Solomon, splits the kingdom under Rehoboam. Immediately after Jeroboam takes over the northern kingdom, he's afraid that the people are going to go back to King Rehoboam. And so he says, don't go up to worship in Jerusalem. I'm going to create gods for you. And that's what he did. And so now Israel has started. So Solomon started it. And then under Jeroboam, he actually creates new gods. And he causes Israel to worship it. But then, so you've got this starting of this slope down of decline of morality. And when you get to Omri, he's doing more evil than those who preceded him. And then his son Ahab, takes over the throne. And unlike his father, Ahab is not a manly man. He's not a warrior king, although he was quite successful in battle at times. But when we start to look at the characteristics of Ahab, he was not what you would aspire to be. And not only did he sin, not only did he continue in the evil of his father's practices with worshiping the calves that Jeroboam had set up, but now he goes and makes a political alliance and marries a foreign woman. And this wasn't just any foreign woman. This was the daughter of Esarhaddon, the king of the Sidonians, who was the neighbor of Israel. It was a political alliance, and that's what they did a lot of. But in addition to him being, Ethbal rather was her father, in addition to him being king of the Sidonians, very likely in that culture, the king was also the priest of worship. And the Sidonians worshipped Baal. He was a Canaanite fertility god, and he was a nasty piece of work. So Omri does evil more than evil before him. In addition, Ahab marries a foreign woman who is the daughter of the king of Sidon and the priest of Baal. And Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 3 specifically warns against this. Deuteronomy 7:3. Nor shall you make marriages with them, talking about the nations he's going to overthrow. You shall not give your daughter to their son, or take their daughter to your son. For they will turn your sons away from me, following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. If you marry foreign women who have... Now, if a foreign woman like Ruth, a Moabitess, is wanting to worship the God of Israel and in a sense converts, then you're okay to do that. God is not against mixed marriages if it is within the heart. We have Rahab the harlot, who became the great-grandmother of King David. You have, or great-great-grandmother, I can't remember which. You have Ruth the Moabitess. She becomes the, she becomes the great-grandmother of King David. And you also have other women who are from other nations who are involved in the Messianic line, but they had a heart to worship the one true God. So God is not against foreign people. He's not against the Gentiles. He's against the practices of the Gentiles. And he says, because they worship other gods, if you marry them and if they marry you, you're going to be led astray. Because bad morals corrupt good conduct, Paul tells us. It is much easier to fall into apostasy than it is to go the straight and narrow path. So what else do we know about Ahab? What are some of the characteristics of an Ahab spirit? He was a man divided. He knew about Yahweh, and he actually spoke about him, but he also worshiped the calves. And James chapter 1 verse 6 says, but we must ask in faith without doubting, for he who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. If you look at King Ahab, he was a divided man. He was unstable in all his ways, and he flopped back and forth between this opinion and that opinion. You can't, one of the things that a manly man will do is he will be resolute. There are times he will be wrong, but at least he's resolute. And what we're going to see here is if a man does not exhibit the characteristics of a manly man, you're going to have problems with the woman. The reason why Jezebel caused the chaos and the carnage that she did, she had evil within her heart, but it was the spirit of Ahab, the instability, the lack of leadership that he provided that turned this wicked woman loose on the nation and brought it to destruction. So Ahab is a man divided. He's born of an evil father. He married a foreign woman against the commands of Torah. And this was a particularly evil woman. And he is a divided man. He flops back and forth. The fourth characteristic of Ahab and the spirit of an Ahab is that he's a man of inaction. He doesn't do anything. There is a famine for 3 years. 3 years there's a famine because Elijah pronounced it. And yet we don't see Ahab doing anything. And it wasn't until Elijah calls the prophets to battle and then challenges all of the people of Israel. And even he said, hey, stop wavering between two opinions. Look, the king is a man divided. The nation is a man divided. As the king goes, as the leader goes, so goes the nation. That's why it's so important in a democracy to elect people with good values, because whatever spirit they have will be transferred to the rest of the nation. Women want and society needs men of action. Even if it's the wrong action, do something. We'll fix it up. I've always found that if you do the wrong thing with the right intent, God will minimize the damage. If you do the wrong thing with the right intent, God will minimize the damage. God does not expect our decisions to be made perfectly. He does not expect us to know everything. What he expects is us to do things with the right motive so that we honor him, and he'll fix up the details. I have made many, many mistakes in my life, but because I have done so in my pursuit of following God and worshiping him, God will take care of some of the potentially massive screw-ups that I could have had. On the other hand, you can make a small mistake. Mostly what you do is right, but if it's with the wrong motive, it could turn out disastrous, because then God takes his hand of protection off. And we have to be so careful of that. We must follow God zealously and with the right motives in order to engender his protection. Jacob made a lot of mistakes, and yet God protected him all the way. That didn't mean he didn't have problems. Jacob had a lot of tsuris in his life. But God still protected him. And one of the things that he says about God is that he has delivered my soul from all distress. And David repeats the same thing. So Ahab is a man of inaction. There's a problem, he doesn't do anything. And it needed to be the prophet who went to him and says, let's get this on, because otherwise everybody's going to die. Another problem that the spirit of Ahab has is that it blames others for everything. Elijah appears to him, he calls him the troubler of Israel. How is it that a prophet, because Elijah pronounced judgment on Israel. There will be no water in the land for 3 years. You're going to have famine. Why? Because you, as the king, led the nation into apostasy. If a man leads his household into apostasy, if they pursue the wrong things, if he doesn't discipline his children and lets them run amok, if he doesn't earn a wage, it says that if a man doesn't provide for his family, he's worse than an unbeliever. If a man doesn't do that, I know of people who got divorced because the husband sat on the couch like a bump on a log. And eventually the wife couldn't stand it and she kicked him out. If a man doesn't do something, then he is going to bring judgment. If a man doesn't follow the Lord and allows his children to go running off, his household will be judged. And what does Ahab do? He blames Elijah. You're the trouble of Israel. And Elijah's response to him is like, no, you're the one who's brought judgment on Israel because of your idolatry, knucklehead. Come on. Torah says that if you go worship other gods, I'm going to bring famine. It says that you will have to resort to cannibalism. And that happened within Israel's history. The famine was so severe at some times that we have a story in the book of Kings where women are complaining to the king. I think it was Joram too, who was the son of Ahab, that on this day we'll eat my son, and tomorrow we'll eat your son. And then she didn't want to offer up her son on the second day. I mean, when a nation gets to that point, that's really bad. But Ahab had the chutzpah, he had the temerity in order to blame Elijah for it. The spirit of Ahab will blame others. And what a manly man will do is take ownership and responsibility for what happens, even if it's external factors. The man is the head of the household, and he is the one responsible. I always maintain that a woman must submit to a man's authority. A man must submit to God's authority. I would change that in a moment. I would much rather swap places with my wife, because for her to have to answer to an imperfect person as to me having to answer to a perfect person who is all powerful, the responsibility is much more upon me. The calling is much higher upon me. But then again, that's why God gave us testosterone, because that is what our role is. Don't blame other people. Another problem that Ahab had is he let Jezebel rule. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 16, as part of the curse, now Eve was created to be Adam's helpmeet. She was to be there by his side, helping him out. Now keep in mind that in the creation account, women come from a more lofty position. Men were created from the dust of the earth. Women are created from the rib of a man. Women started off in a loftier position, and in some ways, women have a more illustrious position. They are the heads of the household. And when a man properly looks after his wife, then she is his crowning glory. But a woman is not supposed to rule, because God says in Genesis 3:16, I will greatly multiply your sorrow and your conception. In pain you shall bring forth children. Your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. What does that desire for your husband mean? It doesn't mean for him physically. It means for his position. There is going to be a tug of war for authority in the household. And one of the things that Ahab did is he let Jezebel rule, because he was a flip-flopper. Ahab had all of the backbone of a fish on a boat. He flopped between this position, he flopped between that position. There was no stability in him. Jezebel, on the other hand, was resolute. It was completely for evil, but she was on a mission. Ahab was more concerned about what people thought of him. He was more concerned about being liked. He was more concerned about all of the wrong things instead of chasing after God. And so when Jezebel looks to do evil and makes proclamations, Ahab doesn't say anything. Elizabeth Elliot says in The Mark of a Man at times must be hard as nails, willing to face up to the truth about himself and about the woman he loves, refusing compromise when compromise is wrong, but he must also be tender. No weapon will breach the armor of a woman's resentment like tenderness. A man must be tender as well as resolute when he's dealing with a wife who is in error. Why is it that a man must take authority? We have commandments within Torah that says if a woman makes a vow rashly, the husband has the authority to nullify it. Why? Because man is the covering in the household. He is supposed to provide the direction. He is supposed to be the spiritual leader. Women, by nature, are more emotional than men. That is the way God designed them. It is not a flaw. It is not a bad thing. Women need to be more emotional. They need to be in tune with the emotions, because they're the ones who are primarily responsible for raising the children. They need to be. My wife can pick up things, and I watch how she deals with my son, And I'm always kind of taking mental notes as to how she deals with things as opposed to how I deal with things. Sometimes, if things get kind of, a little, how shall we say, bubbly in the house, things are starting to erupt. When things are starting to get a little out of control, my first instinct is to take a club and just beat everything down to make it quiet again. But the wife will come in there and she'll use softness and she'll connect emotionally with the children and bring everything down. Now, it's my job to exercise authority, but men by nature are not supposed to be as emotionally driven. We need to be more logical. We need to be rational, because if you're emotional and you're out on the battlefield, you're going to die. You can't be a slave to your emotions if you're fighting in war. Your buddy gets shot beside you, keep on going. That's the way it is. If you're hunting, and sometimes we're hunting, but we're also the hunted. You have these, in Africa, you're going out and hunting game, but there's things that are hunting you as game too. You can't be emotional. Decisions have to be made rationally. And that is what testosterone does, is it creates that fight or flight syndrome, and more often than not, it should be fight. Now, there are times it's wise to run away, but most of the time, we need to stand our guard, and especially when it comes to spiritual things. It says that we are to put on the full armor of God. It means we need to be protected, and we will extinguish the flaming darts of the enemy. Where are the flaming darts of the enemy going to come in most? It'll be at the man. And that is why we need to put our mantle of protection over the wife. The spirit of Ahab wasn't doing that. And so he allowed his wife, who was the stronger personality, to rule, to make decisions, and she led the nation into destruction. It was his responsibility. He's the one who knew the Torah. Number one, he never should have married her. Okay, fine, you married the wrong woman. Now we're going to deal with it. But it was still his responsibility to say, no, this is what the word of God says. Not your God. This is the God that we worship here. But because he vacillated, that because he was weak, he allowed her to make the decisions, and she brought ruin upon the country. He was weak. Ben-Hadad, who was the head of, he was the king of the Syrians. And this was the enemy of the northern kingdom of Israel. And he sends a message to him, and it says, the messenger said to King Ahab, thus says King Ben-Hadad, all of that's in your house, all of your wives and everything are mine. And what does Ahab said? Okay, they're yours. Just don't hit me. Even if a man is going to be destroyed, because the guy is stronger, if you're out on the street and you're walking with your wife and your son, and someone comes up and says, give me your money, I'm going to take your wife and rape her, and I'm going to take your child. I don't care if the guy's twice as big. The man's going to fight. He may lose, but at least he's going to fight. At least he'll go down in battle. But for the king of Israel to say that all of his wives and everything, okay, it's yours. But then when he says that I'm going to search out everything in your house, that's when he drew the line. Oh my goodness, he was weak. Other characteristics of an Ahab spirit. He was childish. He was moody. He was petulant. Whose fault was all this? It was his father, Omri, the warrior king, the general. He never raised up his son to be a man. There was never, why do you think we have bar mitzvahs in Jewish culture? Because at 13 years old, it is considered to be old enough, a child is considered to be old enough to now take a step to be a son of the commandment. You are now responsible for keeping Torah. At 13. How many 33-year-olds do we have in today's soy boy culture? Because masculinity has been hammered and attacked relentlessly. So men are afraid to open up a door for a woman today in a show of chivalry because we're being sexist. My wife loves it when I open up the door for her. My wife loves it when I put a jacket, or I can remember a number of years ago, my wife and I were at we were at a wedding of a friend of my sister's. She had grown up with her, and so we went to her wedding. And there was another friend of my sister's, a childhood friend. I saw all these girls grow up. And she was sitting there with, I don't know if it was her boyfriend or I think it was her boyfriend. She was sitting there and she was freezing. And she's sitting right beside her boyfriend. He's not doing anything. I finally got up. I took off my jacket and I put her over her shoulders. Made him look bad, but it's like, I'm not going to sit here and watch this poor girl freeze like this. It's ridiculous. A woman, more than anything else, wants to be protected. No matter how she defines security, and every woman defines that differently, a woman wants to feel secure with her man. The reason why Jezebel was able to wreak havoc on Israel is because she didn't respect her husband, and she was on a mission to bring her worship into Israel, and Ahab was the gate, and he left it wide open. I mean, can you imagine the king of Israel? And he's lying on his bed, sucking his thumb because he didn't get Naboth's vineyard? And how was it that she responded to him? We read that in the Haftorah portion. She says, "Are you not the ruler of Israel? Get your thumb out of your mouth. I will give you Naboth's vineyard." And we're not even sure if he knew what she did. But here he was lying on his bed, not eating because he didn't get his way. And the video game generation that we have today of boys who won't leave their mother's basements. And then women are complaining, where are all the men? Well, part of that is your fault because you vilified manhood. But deep down inside, no matter how rebellious she is against the idea, deep down, she still wants to be treated like a queen. She still wants to be taken care of. She still wants to be protected. She still wants to respect her husband. He was impulsive. He made rash decisions, all based on emotion, because he didn't bring his emotions under control. He didn't take every thought captive and bring it under the obedience of Messiah and say, no, we're headed toward the goal. And it doesn't matter what comes our way. Sometimes we need to take a stop and we need to kind of rest and we need to get over things. It's not that men can't have emotions. It's that they can't be ruled by them. And we have been given not only the ability to do so more effectively in women, but we have been given the responsibility to make sure that our focus is on going toward God is taking us. We need to be on the road to Zion. We need to be going up to make Aliyah to Jerusalem to worship the Lord. It is the man's responsibility in the household to lead his family to the promised land. Sin crouches at the door, and its desire is for you, but you need to master it. Ahab didn't master anything. Here is the king of an entire nation lying on the bed, pouting because someone didn't sell him his vineyard. And his wife says, oh, for crying. I mean, I can just imagine what Jezebel was thinking at that point. Are you kidding me? Get your sorry rear end out of bed. I'll take care of this for you. And she devises this whole plot. Jezebel was a resourceful woman. Now, she was wicked. She brought in child sacrifice and immorality into Israel, but at least she stood for something. The thing that is most detestable in the eyes of a woman is a man who refuses to stand for anything. And I can only imagine. Now, it's interesting because at some times Ahab was a very effective general in battle. He won a number of battles. There were times where he could be resolute. There were times he actually showed flashes of repentance and came to God. When Elijah confronted him about his wife's murder of Naboth, and he was like, oh, well, the vineyard's available. Did he know of her plan? If so, he's held guilty for it. And if not, where the heck was he? So she arranges this whole thing, has Naboth killed. He goes down to take possession of it. Elijah confronts him and says, this is your judgment. And it says that he repented in sackcloth and ashes. One of the few times in his life, he actually did respond biblically. And then God says, the judgment's not going to come in his generation, but his son's generation. So there was a staying of the judgment on his whole family. Another characteristic of an Ahab spirit is cowardice. So he and Jehoshaphat get together and they're going to go fight at Ramoth Gilead. And that's when they bring Micaiah the prophet and everything else. But what is, I mean, you read this and you go, oh my goodness. What does he do? He says to Jehoshaphat, I will disguise myself, but you wear your robes. You got two kings going into battle. Actually, there was a third one there too. You got two kings going into battle though. And he says to the guy who he's asked to go to battle with him, will you go down with me to Ramoth Gilead and fight so I can take the land back? Jehoshaphat says, sure, but let's at least inquire of the Lord. He was warned, you're going to die. He ignores it. He ends up throwing the prophet into prison instead. And then he says to Jehoshaphat, you get dressed up as a king because they'll come after you. I'm going to disguise myself. Wow. Like just thinking about that, you want to say, man up, boy. He was a coward. And women despise more than anything else a man who will not stand for what he's supposed to. And God does too. When a man truly undertakes his role as protector of the household, as discipliner, and listen, only men are able to do certain things, especially when it comes to the boys. Although all children need a father figure, a godly man, because he's the one that leads them into worship. As the man goes, so the family goes. If a man doesn't worship God on a regular basis, or if he's not reading his Bible, or he's not teaching them how to pray, then the rest of the family isn't going to follow. They'll do whatever he does because he is the spiritual head of the household. My son constantly demands that I wrestle with him. Every day, it's like, is it wrestle time? Mama won't do that. Mama is the nurturer. She's the protector. Mom is the provider of emotional security. Dad is the one who trains him up. And it is my job to read the Bible with my son every night. It is my job to pray with him. It is my job to grow him in the fear and knowledge of the Lord. If a man doesn't do that, he's shirking his responsibility. If a man doesn't protect his wife, then he is shirking his responsibility and will bring the judgment of God. It says that men were to love their wives as Messiah loved the assembly whom he gave himself for. Men need to love their families sacrificially. The family's well-being always has to come before him. How many guys out there do we know that are leaving their families alone and going off and doing this social thing and going with the boys and everything else, going out for drinks, going off on golfing trips and stuff like that instead of spending time with their family and raising them up in the fear and admonition of the Lord? We have a complete breakdown in society today, and that's why we have the problems that we do. So we've established that Ahab was a weak man without conviction or the forcefulness to act. And this is a quote that I took off of a website. Why was Ahab this way? I believe it was because his father Omri failed to help him make the transition from boyhood into mature manhood. Manhood is always conferred on a man by another man, usually his father. The father does this by doing things with his son that are unique to manhood, and then by affirming manly behavior or achievements that the young man does all by himself. This can happen at a particular time, or it might happen over a series of events. The point is that a man must, at some point, leave childhood and become able to take on the role of manhood. To do this, he needs to confirm his ability to endure and overcome, to take responsibility, and to risk something. If he's never risking anything, then there's never any growth. If he never goes through the struggle of failure and learning to come back stronger the next time, he will always remain where he is. Why is God putting so many believers through the fiery testing, or as Peter calls it, the fiery trials? James calls it the same thing. Why are we going through so many fiery trials? Why is the testing so hard? Why is it so difficult? Because God needs to train up, especially the men. The Jezebel spirit is waging war against men because a godly man is what the devil fears most. When we raise up a generation, when you've ever seen a church or a congregation or a synagogue where it is mostly the women who rule, there's no power. When a congregation, on the other hand, has godly men who are leading it and who are taking care of their families, they are wreaking havoc in the spiritual realm against the kingdom of darkness. And a Jezebel spirit will wage war against that because it wants to neuter men. What was the reason why that men who served in the king's court were eunuchs? They used to cut off the testicles in order so that the man would not produce testosterone and wouldn't have any desire to go sleep with the king's harem. That was primarily it. Why is it we're putting all of these hormone blockers and things like that into the water supply, in the food supply? We want to dull men down. We're even coming against things like football. Now, listen, I don't get watching NFL football, but I understand the excitement of, a bunch of big men crushing against each other. I mean, listen, I did kickboxing for 27 years. I get the whole thing about, having an aggressive spirit and things like that, watching hockey and what used to be the biggest thing, watching a fight break out. Why is it that, MMA and boxing have always been so popular? You get a couple of guys who are just wailing on each other, but there's excitement in that, the whole warrior idea. And there's a war against that. And Jezebel will try to undermine that. She'll try to make spiritual eunuchs out of men, afraid to take a chance, afraid of failure, afraid of standing for what's right because, public opinion will massacre you. Who cares? The reason why Jezebel's spirit is allowed to flourish in society and do her thing and to take a nation into apostasy is because the spirit of Ahab allows it. Make no mistake about it. Men can be the gatekeeper for what is good or evil, no matter what that spirit is. And the reason why there's such a war in society against the spirit of Jezebel, and we'll be covering her characteristics next, is because the spirit of Ahab allows it. So how is it we fight against that? I've told you the problem. What's the solution? In a Charlie Brown Christmas, when CBS asked Charles Schulz to create a Peanuts Christmas special, Schulz was a devout Christian, and he insisted on using the passage from Luke chapter 2, which was the announcement of the birth of Yeshua. And you remember that CBS didn't want him to do it because already, even in 1965, there was, we don't want too much religion in there. But he insisted on having Linus read that passage. And in the angelic announcement, at the very moment where he quotes the angel saying, "Fear not," Linus drops his security blanket. And it was all done very intentionally. He goes to the center of stage, the spotlight is put on him, he's reading about the birth of Yeshua, and he drops his security blanket right when he quotes the passage, "Fear not." Well, how many times did God say, "Fear not"? He told it to Joshua, he told it to Moses, he told it to King David, and he tells it to us. King Solomon. God tells us to not fear because perfect love, the love of Yeshua, casts out fear. Now, we may not know how to do something. We may not be certain of what we're to do, but God tells us not to fear. There's a difference between uncertainty and fear. There's a difference. Paul tells us in Philippians 4:4, be anxious for nothing. Don't be anxious. You can be uncertain, But don't be anxious about it, because God has got you. He says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And if there is a war in your household, and if there is a war in society on manhood, men need to step up and be, like Gandalf said, when the Balrog was trying to cross, he'll take his sword and or his staff, and he'll slam it down, and he'll say, you shall not pass. The spirit of Jezebel is no longer going to pass in the households of society today if men will rise up and take their rightful role. Linus, who always carried around his security blanket and sucked his thumb, when he's reading about the announcement that the Messiah had come, he said, fear not, and he dropped a security blanket. Whatever the men out there are doing in order to bring security to themselves, whether it be vacillating, whether it be seeking after the approval of men, whether it be compromising in their workplace, whether it be allowing their wives to rule over them, when they finally drop the security blanket, that protection, and they trust in God instead, God will then begin to raise up within him not the spirit of Ahab, but the spirit of a Jehu, the spirit of King David, who, although he was a little boy, it says that he was ruddy and good looking, but he was a wee guy, and he was only a teenager, and he went up against this giant who was twice his height and was a seasoned warrior. And he said to him, you come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of the hosts, and I'm going to cut your head off. We need a generation of men who are going to rise up and start cutting the head off the giants that are in their lives, and men to start taking their rightful role in society. When men stop fearing what others think of them and start being concerned about what God thinks of them, and learn and practice what God demands of them, we are going to see a revolution in society, and we are going to see the enemy's plans, Jezebel's plans to annihilate the family, to annihilate society, and bring death and destruction to a halt. Take up your sword, take up your sling, take up your bow, men, and be a man. Let's pray. Father, in the name of Yeshua, you have called men to be men, and you have called us to rise up and be protectors of society and defenders of the faith. And I pray, Father, I release an anointing right now in the name of Yeshua upon all who are listening, upon all of society, that men would become godly men, protectors of their family, providers, and seekers after the things of God. Let us go out there and destroy the spirit of Jezebel, to bring it to its knees, Father, as we take our rightful role in being those representatives that you have called us to be. Let us not be fearful like Barak, where Deborah said that I will go, but you will not get the glory because you are fearful. Let us, Father, rather be like King David. Though he was a youth, he had the confidence of the Lord. Let us be like Elijah, that even though Ahab wanted to have him killed and Jezebel wanted to have him killed, let us confront the Ahab spirit. Let us confront the Jezebel spirit and say that greater is he who is within me than he who is in this world. We praise you and thank you, Father, for what you're about to do, and we are counting on a revolution. In the name of Yeshua, we pray. Amen.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Yes.